the 5 or 6 years that I was in New England is when I felt the most pressure. I remember feeling overwhelming anxiety. I remember getting stress headaches going to work. I just like snapped. It's a difference in playing not to mess up and playing to achieve. And that's what I was doing. I was tying my performance to my worth. And so I had to have a good game or a good practice in order to feel good about myself and to feel like I was worth it. I wrote this Facebook post in 2015. It went viral. I wasn't the star. I wasn't the person that was getting interviewed after every game. But I write that about something that's going on in this country and about the spiritual ramifications of it. And that allowed me to go speak in places that I would never have, even if I was the starting tight end on the New Orleans Saints at that time. The story goes something like this, and since we're on a podcast, I'll share it.
First of all, this is my voice. I'm Tim Green, and I have ALS. But this podcast isn't about ALS. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I don't feel sorry for me. I'm a father of 5, married for over 35 years, a New York Times best-selling author, an NFL first-round pick, and a practicing attorney. This is Nothing Left Unsaid, where my son Troy and I sit down with extraordinary people for raw, honest conversations about life, its toughest trials, and greatest triumphs. My voice in today's episode is powered by 11 Labs. Today's guest spent 15 seasons in the National Football League, where courage looks like getting back up, leadership sounds like telling the truth in a huddle of grown men, and faith is tested every Sunday in front of millions. Benjamin Watson is much more than just a Super Bowl champion and a first-round draft pick. He is one of the rare athletes whose impact somehow grew larger after the pads came off. On the field, he was the tight end who outran the impossible, chasing down Champ Bailey in a play that still defines what effort looks like. Off the field, he's become a voice our culture actually listens to. Thoughtful, steady, unafraid. His books, his advocacy, his work with families, mothers, children, and justice issues. All of it come from a sense of shame shaped by faith, humility, and a refusal to look away from hard conversations. Today, we're going to talk about identity beyond the jersey, moral courage in a divided country, how fathers shape futures, and what hope looks like when he walks into a locker room, studio, a church, or a community that's hurting. Ben, thank you for your heart, your voice, and the witness you've carried for so many years. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation. That was a great intro. So it took me back a little bit to the locker room.
When you look back at the kid in Rock Hill and the man who played 15 years in the NFL, what's the thread that connects them?
Man, when I look back, so I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia. Lived in Virginia for most of my life. Moved to South Carolina in '96 when I was in 10th grade. My father worked for a ministry that planted churches. And so we moved to this place called Rock Hill, South Carolina, and I did not want to go. Like I'm the oldest of 6 kids. I was about to start playing football, and I was like, I don't know where this place is on a map. It only had 2 high schools at the time. I didn't want to go, but it turned into being, one of those places that, with high school football and just the coaches that I had in Rock Hill and Northwestern High School, it really was good for me long-term in my career. But the thread, I would say, is family. The thread is my faith. My father led me to the Lord when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And it was always about, in our family, it was about your schoolwork, and it was about giving 100% in everything that you did. And so as I look back over my career and over my childhood, it was always give everything you got. It was always work harder than everybody else, and not just so that you can accomplish for yourself. My parents always told us that we were working for the Lord. We weren't working for ourselves. Like what we were doing as athletes, as a professional athlete, as a father, even as a kid, was about using your platform to glorify God and maximizing your talents in that way. Now, I'm not going to say it was perfect. I was very selfish, still am very selfish in a lot of ways. But that's the thread, I think, is an idea of having a perspective that is, beyond your immediate circumstances in the sport and understanding that, we are ambassadors for Christ, especially as believers. Everything that we do, we're an ambassador for our Savior.
You said your dad led you to religion when you were 5 or 6. Did you know at that time really what it was, or were you just kinda going through it because your parents were doing it?
So I grew up in church. Like my father was a pastor, as I mentioned before. Our family vacations growing up were to like FCA camps, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and so we would all pile into the car and travel around the country. Me and my 5 siblings, where Daddy would be like the platform speaker at an FCA camp. And we would just run around with all the high school athletes or college athletes, even as little kids, and just try to play football with them and stuff like that. And so I grew up, understanding, going to vacation Bible school, all those sorts of things. But my dad used to always say, just because, your parents are believers, it doesn't mean you are. And just because, if you put your head in the oven, it don't make you a biscuit. That's what he would say. So going to church, going to vacation Bible school, very early on, we understood the difference between having a saving faith for yourself and knowing what your parents know. Now, even as a young kid, the story goes something like this, and since we're on a podcast, I'll share it. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, I had this teddy bear that was like as tall as me, and my father played football at University of Maryland. He's like 6'2", 250, but he used to get behind the teddy bear and like box me when I was a kid. I don't know if he was trying to like toughen me up or something or what, but those are some of my favorite memories thinking back was boxing Daddy with the teddy bear. Anyway, there was one night he boxed me with the teddy bear before I went to bed and I lost. And as the story goes, I'm in my bed saying, "Mommy, Daddy, you bring that teddy bear back here. I'm not going to bed till I beat that teddy bear." And they're like, "This kid has a serious like problem." So he comes back out. We box the teddy bear. He allows me to win. And then I remember that night specifically. We're living in Virginia Beach, Virginia, in our townhouse. And I guess for whatever reason, I have been asking about death or like what happens to us when we die, stuff like that. And also, as I mentioned before, I grew up going to church. I understood the gospel as much as a 5-year-old could, 6-year-old could. And my father asked me that night. He said, "Benjamin, if you were to not wake up tomorrow, do you know where you would go?" Kind of weird to ask a kid, but I think that was kind of how our conversations had gone. And I said, "No." And he shared with me a very familiar verse, John 3:16. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life." And right there, at that point in time is when I passed from death into life, is when I put my faith and trust in Jesus Christ as the substitute and the payment for my sin. And so there's obviously, I mean, I'm about to be 45. There's been a lot of growth since then, but I point to that time, is when I received eternal life. And so for me, I think kind of going back to that original question about the thread of my life has been wanting to please the Lord. And within that, I've had various struggles, of course, but that's been the kind of the driving factor in most of the things that I do.
You scored a 48 on the Wonder Lake and ran a 4.5 340 yard dash at 255 pounds. For our non-sports audience, those numbers are unbelievable. When did you first realize football and intellect weren't opposites, but tools God had given you?
Wow. Um, I think I never thought they weren't opposites. Like I never thought that intellect, that grades, that football, athletics, um, were two things in separate silos. I didn't see a partition between the two, and I think part of that is because, again, in my childhood, academics were preached. Both of my parents went to college. Both of them understood the importance of education. They didn't play around with us getting bad grades. That they wanted us to focus on that. I went to a few different schools growing up, but academics were always important. And then the athletic piece was a natural outpouring of that. And so I think I also understood. I had horror stories about like not qualifying or not getting the right test grades to go to college. And so always in my mind, it was, yeah, you can be a good athlete, but you better get good test scores because I know a lot of guys who were very talented who weren't able to go to college because they didn't have the test scores. And so I think for me that was always part of it. And then even going to the NFL. I mean, this from your time in the NFL. That's I like to say that we're the most educated pro sport football is because we've got the most guys that have spent the most time in college and then go on to play pro football because we have to stay there. And it's a cerebral sport. I mean, it's a sport where you have to do some thinking on the run. You have to learn a big playbook. Yeah, it's reactionary, but part of that whole process is understanding, can a guy think? Can he digest a playbook? And I don't know about you, but one of the hardest things for me transitioning from college to the NFL was the amount of information that you have to digest, how quickly you have to learn it, and then be able to do it darn near perfect because they'll accept people who commit mistakes, but they don't accept error repeaters. That's the first thing they tell you. You can error, but don't be an error repeater. And so that was probably one of the biggest challenges moving, toward the NFL. But I think the academics piece was always important to me and something that is and should be important to every young athlete, because they always talk about the fact that sports in college, sports in high school, professional sports, it doesn't last forever.
That's something that I always preach. No one can ever take away your education, and sports never last forever, no matter how great you are. Ben, what's the truest thing you learned about leadership inside an NFL locker room? Something that actually held up later as a husband and a father.
Yeah, I think, the locker room is a place where people wear a lot of masks. And, I think it's like that in life in general. And no matter if you're in a corporation or a nonprofit, how we present ourselves can sometimes be um, masked. It can be, we can be putting on airs. We can be hiding behind pain or presenting as something that we're not. And in the NFL locker room, there is a lot of that. There's a lot of, people who are hurting in different ways, people who feel unsure of themselves, people who are dealing with perfectionism or addiction or whatever it may be. But then you come into this space where you have to compete every day and you have to be strong physically, mentally, emotionally, because that's what the sport requires to an extent. It's a tough place to earn a living. It's a tough place. And so we bring those sorts of things in. But what I learned about leadership was that the best leaders are people who are authentic. And the people who are the loudest, yeah, some people follow them, but the people who are authentic are the ones where when everything is going crazy, they're the people that individuals come to because they trust them and ask them for advice. They're the people who are seen as wise or as trustworthy. And so I learned that authenticity takes you much further than bravado or presenting an image that's not true. And I think about family life. It's the same thing as a father. I want to be authentic with my kids. Like, yes, there's a hierarchy in my house. There's order in my house. As parents, as a husband, there's a specific order that God ordains inside the home, and we understand that. But within that, when it talks about, in Ephesians, fathers don't exasperate your children, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. That's being authentic with them about your shortcomings, your failures, your fears. Some of the best conversations I've had with my kids is when they're worried or scared about something about performing. And I'm like, I am totally nervous every time I perform. I dealt with perfectionism, I dealt with fear, all these sorts of things. And they look at your dad as this like hero that has no chinks in the armor. But part of leadership is being authentic and showing people how to fight through some of those fears. And it's also being accountable. Something in the NFL locker room you learn very early is that leadership is about accountability. You watch the film every single day. The eye in the sky don't lie. And, being accountable is how a football team gets better. It's how you trust the guy next to you. It's how you understand where you need to improve. And in the home, it's about accountability as a husband. It's about, man, I messed up. I shouldn't have said that to my wife. I shouldn't have said that to my kids. I should have made a better decision here. And being willing to admit those things is tough because we all got pride, but those are things that we have to do in our home and outside of our home.
You played in a lot of really good locker rooms. My dad mentioned the Super Bowl championship. Do you have, I'm sure you played with a ton of great leaders, but is there somebody that, like, when my dad first asked that question, somebody just popped to your brain as like, oh, that guy was one of the best leaders I've ever been around?
Yeah, there's been a lot. There's been a lot. It's hard to pick one. I think by default we always look at quarterbacks as leaders, although not all of them are great leaders. Um, but I was fortunate to play with a couple guys at that position that I think for me as a tight end on offense, guys that I would go to bat for. I mean, I think about a guy like Drew Brees. When I got to New Orleans, I got there. That was my third team, and I remember getting to New Orleans and everybody talking about Drew Brees, and you know how it is. It's like everybody has their heroes. I mean, they're great players all over the league. Every generation has great players. And they're like, no, this guy's different. I said, okay, look, okay, I'll see. Because by that time, I was like year 10. So I've seen a lot of good players. Um, and I remember going in there into the facility, and this was maybe before week one. And we come in there on a Saturday, which Saturdays pretty much is, you come in for a walkthrough. You have meetings first, and you have a walkthrough. Then you have some time before you come back to the hotel, or you come back to take the bus to the airport, to get all your stuff done. And I remember walking in there early, and I look in the indoor facility, and the lights are still kind of dim. And I see this figure out there on the field, like doing all these crazy hand motions. I'm trying to figure out what's going on, and the strength coach is like, "Yeah, that's Drew. He comes in here every Saturday and goes through the entire script, the entire offensive script." Now, a Sean Payton offensive script probably has 200 plays on. I mean, it's ridiculous. And what Drew would do is he would go out there before we would all come out there, and he would go through all of his reads, every single read, call every play, and you see him out there pointing to his first read, pointing to the in cut, pointing to the back in the flat, and just going through all of his progressions. And he would do that with every single play, pass plays, run plays, it didn't matter. And that to me showed, okay, I expect high levels of performance from you all, but I'm preparing myself so that I can perform at a high level as well, so that you can trust that I'm doing everything that I can in order to make this team great. Obviously, Tom Brady. I never felt like I was going to lose when I'm in the huddle with Tom Brady, and it's not just because he's a great athlete; he's a freak athlete. He people don't give him credit for that, but his resilience, his leadership, his attitude, his ferocity, like all those sorts of things in the meeting room, on the practice field, they matter. I remember a guy, Randy Moss, coming to the Patriots. We had heard all these crazy things about Randy Moss. Man, he doesn't play hard. He's selfish. He took his shoes off and sat on the sideline when he was playing for the Oakland Raiders. And he did do all those sorts of things. He pulled his pants down, in Green Bay. Like, he did all those sorts of things. But then he gets there to the Patriots, and we're wondering what he's going to be like. One of the best teammates, because he elevated everybody else. And you saw the way that he worked. I mean, I can go down the list of guys that, maybe you didn't even know about, but even spiritually, there was a guy named Kenyon Coleman that I played with the Browns. He was a defensive lineman. And one day he says to me, "Hey man, we pray every Wednesday and Thursday morning at like 6 a.m. Why don't you come join us?" I'm like, dude, I got 3 kids under 3 at the time. Like, I'm not getting up before I have to. And I'm not going to go to a prayer meeting before I go to practice. I pushed him off, him and a guy named Reggie Hodges, who was our punter. And eventually I ended up joining them, and we did that all season long. And it was one of the most impactful times I've ever had as an athlete in the locker room. And it was happening, in our home before we went to work. We were kind of setting the day right before we went. And that's leadership. It's calling guys up to a higher standard and challenging to do something different.
Let's talk about leadership. You played for Bill Belichick, Sean Payton, and John Harbaugh, three very different leaders, but also three generational coaches. What did each one teach you about excellence? And did you have a favorite coach?
Oh man, I'll start with the favorite part first. Sean Payton was probably my favorite because of his personality. One minute, Sean is like running showing us how coverage works. The next minute, he thinks he can run a route better than everybody else, so he's like demonstrating it, which is hilarious. The next minute, he's doing CrossFit, you know, in the weight room, and bringing in CrossFit guys from New Orleans that he does CrossFit with, and incorporating that into our workouts. He's just when they say like players coach, like he's that type of a personality. He has enough structure that he got from Parcells and that Bill got, but he also has enough levity, I would say, that sometimes gets him in trouble, but that makes it fun. And then also he's an offensive head coach, so I enjoyed, really enjoyed hearing him explain the game plans and hearing and seeing how he operated. I remember when I got to New Orleans, um, people told me like, "Look, Sean Payton, you got to be ready because there's game day Sean." I was like, "Game day Sean, I'm coming from Bill Belichick. Like nothing's worse than that. Like Bill will cuss you out in a hot second." As I know, this game day Sean. Game day Sean is like totally different than practice Sean because I think he took back then we used to take something called Spark. It was like an energy drink. He would double Spark. He would just be in this zone and give you these looks on game day. But the other thing about game day Sean is that he would literally draw up plays in the turf. We didn't have dirt in the Superdome. It was actually turf. But he would come to the sideline, and you had to always be ready for him to make up a new play. And I love that as an offensive player because most of his plays actually work really well. Uh, Bill was totally different. Not much levity there. And I would say Harbaugh was still one of those guys. I appreciated his heart. Just a very caring person. But what did I learn from each of them? I learned the importance really from Bill of accountability. It didn't matter who it was, whether it was Tom Brady or the 53rd man on the roster. He for the most part treated everybody the same as far as his expectations of them. And what I mean by that is, we used to come in there and have something called the low lights. The low lights were all the plays that we messed up on in practice the day before or in games the week before. And so every day we come in there and we watch them, and Bill would fuss at people. He would ask you questions about why you did something that you shouldn't have done. But he had that smoke for everybody. Like he had it for Tom, he had it for me, he had it for guys on that were just on special teams. And I think because of that, you learn the importance of being accountable, of raising the standard for everybody.
Did that cause pressure for a guy like you? Where in your NFL career did you feel the most pressure? And did your faith ever reshape the way you carried it?
That's a great question about pressure. I think pressure to perform is one of the things I think that a lot of people deal with, at least anxiety, even depression. And for me, when I came out of college, got drafted by the Patriots. They had just won a Super Bowl the year before. We ended up winning the Super Bowl that my rookie year. I tore my ACL early in that year and didn't play for much of the year. And that was probably one of the hardest years of my career. The 5 or 6 years that I was in New England is when I felt the most pressure. Now, part of that is you're on a team that is excellent, a team with a lot of expectations. You've got a coach that is, as I mentioned before, is the driver of that. Um, but I felt the most pressure to perform there ever, and I didn't have the tools really to deal with it. I can remember my fifth year. Tim, and I remember feeling overwhelming anxiety. I remember getting stress headaches going to work. I remember, having all these things going on, and I've been married for maybe 3 years. My wife and I got married in 2005, right after my rookie year, and this was maybe our third year of marriage. And I just like snapped, and she said, "You need to get some help." I'm like, "I don't need any help." She's like, "No, you need to get some help." And I ended up going and seeing a psychiatrist there. This is my fifth year in New England, and man, it was one of the best things I ever did. And it didn't cure everything, but growing up, um, in a household with a father that I really look up to, somebody who I want to emulate, want to be like. Sometimes I felt like I can't live up to that. Going being on a team with excellent players who win in Super Bowls, sometimes I felt like I can't live up to that. There were so many places in my life that I felt like I wasn't good enough. Um, and I developed this performance, perfectionism. Really, I developed this perfectionism that was not healthy, was not from the Lord, and it produced in me a whole lot of anxiety that was debilitating in a lot of ways. And so after I went through that process with the psychiatrist, learning, peeling back some layers and understanding like where this came from and everything, I started to feel this sense of freedom um, in playing football. Something that I love to do, but because of all the other things, the expectations, money, media, my internal things that were going on, I started to hate it, um, and I started to get that joy back. And so that was the toughest time. And still, I think it's one of those things where if you have some of those anxieties naturally, sometimes you don't get rid of them altogether. Like I still have times now where I feel inadequate or I feel like I got to be perfect. And why am I not perfect? Well, why did I not do this completely right? Why did I not recite this completely right? Whatever it is, why did I make this mistake? Why did I say this? Um, but we serve a God that gives grace. And what was interesting and the paradox there is how as a believer you understand, or we should understand, that we are saved by grace. Um, but if we're not careful, we will still think we have to work for righteousness. Like we have to work for acceptance. And that was kind of bleeding into my professional life. So long story long, is that New England was the toughest time for me, um, but through that, it allowed me to get freedom on the other end, and it's something that, hey, when it creeps up, I can identify it now where I couldn't before.
Did you notice, an impact on your performance, like, after you spoke with the therapist? Did you start to did that freedom bring you more success on the field, or was it about the same, you just felt better?
The freedom that came after dealing with it was a sense of more enjoyment and more joy. Uh, I look at that time early in my career and think, it's a difference in playing not to mess up and playing to achieve.
Mhm.
There's a huge difference there. I mean, and that's what I want for my kids is like I look at my kids sometimes and I can see how some of them inherited my perfectionism, so to speak. Some of them inherited some of my anxieties and some of my fear. And what I don't want for them and what I'm trying to address with them early on is don't allow that to hold you back. Like you have to be willing to fail if you're going to ever excel. Because what happens is you tie your performance to your worth, and that's what I was doing. I was tying my performance to my worth, and so I had to have a good game or a good practice in order to feel good about myself and to feel like I was worth it. When you understand your inherent eternal worth is measured outside of your performance, then it allows you to go perform and to take risks and to fail because your your worth isn't tied to that. And so in essence, it helps you to achieve more. And so my performance did get better. I mean, I had some different opportunities too. So I think that coupled with it, but I think the biggest thing was just my countenance and my attitude and how I felt about who I was as a person, as a man. outside of my performance, and that gave me a lot of freedom.
I just realized when you were saying that and you said the years, I'm gonna put both you guys on the spot. You guys are both high Wonderlic guys, so I'm gonna test you here. I did my dad ever announce a game that you were playing in? I feel like he did.
He probably did. I mean, I got in '04 and played till 2019. Um,
He
so
he
so yeah,
announced
I'm sure you probably did.
I think you guys have probably even met before because my guess is you would have been on the list of guys that got interviewed.
Yeah,
But anyways,
I'm sure we did.
I know we did somewhere along in the madness of an NFL season.
Yeah, we got to look up some of those games.
yeah, that'd be funny.
Yeah, let's look after and find the game. Ben, you've spoken often about fatherhood. What's a lesson you learned from your own dad that still guides you in the middle of chaos, success, or doubt?
I think one of the biggest things that I took from him and that I still take from him is the importance of being present. And I can remember times where my dad would drive. So my dad is a pastor. He would preach on every Sunday. And I can remember times in college where my dad would drive from South Carolina. I specifically remember he drove from South Carolina to Alabama. We were playing against Alabama in Tuscaloosa when I was at Georgia, and he came to the game, and it's like a noon game, and it's hot as I don't know what there. People are passing out in the stands. So he drove down, and then he left that game and drove all the way back to South Carolina. And my dad drives the speed limit too. Like, to my chagrin, he drives like below the speed limit. He's like, this is, he goes, whatever you do between you and God and you, he said, but I'm driving the speed limit. So he drives the speed limit. It takes him a long time to get places. And he drove all the way back and he preached the next morning. I can remember being in high school and going to play a team that was kind of up in Virginia somewhere. Remember, I was actually in ninth grade and I didn't think he was going to be there. And all of a sudden I hear this voice, let's go, Benjamin. I'm like, oh my goodness, my dad's here. I'm looking around for him, but he always showed up. Like he did his very best to show up. It didn't matter what he had to do. He did his best to show up when it mattered. Um, and even at home, he was there with all the things he had to do. And so a lot of times one of the struggles dads have is we have busy schedules. We feel like we can't give our kids enough time. And it's whatever time we have, I tell dads this, I tell myself this all the time, is that, you know, you don't have to be a perfect dad to be a present dad. And your presence is not just physical, because a lot of dads are there physically, but emotionally they're aloof or they're occupied by their work or by their phone or whatever it may be. But being present with your kids is the most important gift you can really give them. And it doesn't matter if you have 2 hours a day or 12 hours a day. Your children remember when you're with them how you engage with them. So that's something that I took from him. I think the other thing that I took from my dad, if I can add one more thing, is now that I've been married for 20 years, my wife and I celebrated 20 years this past July.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And our marriage has been great. Obviously, like every marriage, we argue, we fight, we do all those sorts of things. Um, but I look back at my parents' marriage, and now that I've been married 20 years, I can identify, that these are two fallen people that are in a marriage. That's what we all are. But I admire their commitment, and I admire his commitment, and I see that marriage gives the kids a sense of stability. It gives them a sense of worth, and they watch how mommy and daddy communicate with each other, how they love each other. And so I got from him a sense of discipline, a sense of responsibility, but also a sense of commitment, even if things are tough. And that commitment is not just about out there to a job and to making money. That commitment is how you commit inside your home to the things that you say matter the most.
It's funny because I think this is what my dad's saying right now, but I the presence thing is something that I learned almost over the top from my dad. He was at every single thing, Benjamin, every single thing. I actually thought that I didn't know, you're a little kid, right? I thought he had made I knew he was a first round draft pick. I knew when I was a little kid, first round draft picks made a lot more money than my dad made, but I thought he was living off the NFL money because I'd be sitting in class and they'd be like, a parent's coming in to read to the class, and I'd look at the door and he'd walk in. I'm like, come on, man. Like, don't you have something better you could do than this?
I
And
do.
he coached all my little league teams and all my siblings' teams and all, that come in reading to the class, come in to, be on the field trips. I'm like, man, this guy has got to be so bored that he's got. Meanwhile, he's working as a lawyer and writing the. I thought he wrote books for fun, and I knew he announced football games, but I didn't think there was any way they would pay you to do that. I thought that was just like so.
It's amazing as a kid how you just like have no idea. One of my kids just realized a little while ago. It was like, oh, you got paid to play football. I thought you paid them.
It's amazing, and that's something I feel like too, that I think the cell phone is like, obviously it's an amazing technology, but it's so bad as a parent because like your work is always right there. You could touch your work at all times. Not like back in the day, like you leave the office or you leave the practice facility and you drive home, like you're home.
Yeah.
Now it's like you can touch your phone and you could, work is right there. It's always kind of staring at you. But yeah, those are good ones.
Now, you're seeing what it's like firsthand with your own kids, Troy, full circle. Benjamin, many players struggle with the transition of retirement. What did your mind sound like when you stepped away from the game?
Uh, you know, I struggled, and I think you make it. That's a great point because a lot of people struggle differently. Like I know some guys. I'm sure you know some guys too, Tim, and they're just like, I'm done. I'm done. I don't care anymore. I did my time, and I'm moving on. And some people are just able to just break free cleanly. Then we know a lot of guys, deal with depression, they deal with addiction, those sorts of things, trouble in their relationships and everything. So there's this whole spectrum with it. For me, it was difficult. It was very difficult, and I played, 16, and the end is coming, like it's coming, and you probably hung on longer than you should have. And you should have quit a long time ago. But in your mind, like there's always the next. There's always I'm trying to get to this level. I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to get better, even as a 39-year-old player, which is what I was when I retired. And so I I struggled with, not necessarily identity, but what's next. Like I felt like I had no schedule. Everything in my life was predicated on the schedule of football, our vacations, when we could do certain things, what I ate, when I slept, how I worked out, like when our date night was on the day off, which is Tuesday. Like everything in life was kind of predicated on, community, guys in Bible study, all those sorts of things was predicated on the cadence, the rhythm of football. And then when that was gone, we had COVID, and then we moved from New England, from Boston down to Georgia, and there were some times where I was just like, I need to go talk to somebody because I'm really feeling like, what am I doing all day? And I started doing broadcasting with the SEC network. I do some work with Pro Athlete Ministry. Wrote a book. I do a podcast now. I do a lot of different things. I'm in school. I do a lot of different things, but I just was feeling like the thing that I had dedicated my life to, that I always wanted to do. I mean, one of my first birthdays, I got a football. It's not here anymore. And so for me, there was like a mourning process of like mourning the person that I was or the life that I was. And so I would say it's been 5 years now, and I'm in a much better place. I um, have things that I'm dedicated to. I understand, where life is right now. Kind of got a new cadence, but and rhythm, but it was difficult moving from that, and I think that it's important to talk about how we prepare ourselves for it. And I felt like I was prepared. I mean, I went to the boot camps. In our house, we don't have a lot of football stuff up, throughout the NFL. Like kind of kept this to kind of be our safe place. You won't see a bunch of pictures of, me in the NFL or anything like that. Um, but football meant a lot to me, and it meant a lot to what our family was. And so it was a process of, man, just reimagining and, changing direction. And I'm still going through that process. I would say, like, there's still kind of, getting to know what you want to do and seeing where the Lord leads you. There's still some of that going on, but the first couple of years were kind of difficult for me.
My dad said that, like, when we go back to Falcons games, even now in his wheelchair and everything, like, he said when they come running out of the tunnel, he gets goosebumps like he's about to run out. Do you feel that still?
I can imagine. Yes, yeah. I mean, I said we just went to the SEC championship a little while ago for Georgia, and college is a bit different. Obviously, like there's this different affinity I think for my college, but when you hear them play that song, the bugle, when the bugle starts playing, and I remember being in the locker room in Sanford Stadium, and you would hear the bugle, and it was just like, oh, it's time to go. It's time to go. And I showed my son the other day. I was like, look, I'm getting goosebumps right now. So I think that feeling for a lot of us, it never leaves you. And I think there's a sadness there, because that was a life that and again, there were a lot of things I didn't like about playing football. And my wife reminds me, you were in pain probably 90% of the time, and I was. But in your mind, you remember those emotions and those feelings that you connect yourself to. So yeah, I understand that. That makes a lot of sense to me.
You've said that racism at its root is a sin problem. When did you first understand that your voice could bridge anger and empathy? And how did that responsibility feel?
Yeah, I think part of kind of going back to my time in New England, where it was, Bill ran a tight ship. He told us what we should say to the media, how we should say it, who should talk to the media, and who shouldn't talk to the media. And so there, I kind of had this, and I was a young player too, which as a younger player, you don't. Well, these players now they talk a lot more than we did, but as a young player, you're just trying to make it and make your mark and do your job. That's it. And then I left New England, having that mindset, and then ended up going to Cleveland and to New Orleans. And I think I started to understand the importance of engaging and that I had a voice outside of football. I did not, however, think that I would ever have a voice on that topic specifically. But I wrote this Facebook post in 2015 about what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, where a police officer killed a man named Michael Brown. And there were, all these, stories about what happened. Nobody really knew. And there were protests and those sorts of things. I ended up writing because this was a summer where we had seen several other instances of police citizen violence. Um, many of them, that have went viral involving unarmed black men. And so there was already a heightened awareness about that issue during that time. And then you added on this one, and I wrote just how I was feeling about it. And didn't even really know how to post to Facebook at the time. I wasn't even really on there that much, but I had somebody do it for me. And I was worried because, I was talking about something that was emotional, and people look at it from different ways, and you represent the city, you represent your club that you're playing for, you represent the Lord, you represent your family. Like, you don't want to say something that might, number one, be wrong, but number two, create some sort of animosity where there doesn't need to be any. But I said, I'm just going to talk about how I feel. And so I talked about feeling hopeless. I talked about, being angry about what happened. I talked about, being sympathetic for the officer's family if he didn't do anything wrong, but also understanding that we need to mourn with this mother who lost her child, and looking at the history of our country and all these sorts of things, all my emotions, because these are complicated things. Like, so many times we try to make something, we try to make this, dichotomy when really there's a both and. Like, we can feel multiple things at the same time. And I wrote the post. It went viral. I had teammates saying, "Hey, man, my grandma told me you wrote something that I need to read." Like I had coaches say things to me. I was able to talk about it on TV. And at the end of the post, I did write about racism being a sin problem because we understand that that every vice, every hatred, prejudice, fear, all these things come out. The root cause is sin. Now that doesn't absolve anybody of their racist feelings or the structures that have been created to promote racial superiority. It doesn't absolve people of that, but it's saying that for every physical problem that we deal with, whether that's poverty in some ways or racism, murder, whatever it is, there's a sin component there that needs to be addressed while we address the manifestations and the outcomes of that sin in real time. And what was interesting though, Tim, is that I don't know about you, but at that point in time when I wrote that, this is how God works kind of crazy. So at that point in time when I wrote that, I was a backup tight end. I wasn't very happy about where I was, although I was playing behind a guy named Jimmy Graham, which I should have been playing behind him. Like this dude, you talk about one of the best athletes ever, it was him. So I understand why I was where I was, but I was feeling upset because I wasn't getting the looks that I wanted. I wasn't getting the play time that I wanted, and it was almost like God, the Spirit of God, affirming that just be available where you are, and I will use you for whatever purposes I want to use you for at that time. Like I wasn't the starter. I wasn't the person that was getting interviewed after every game. But I write that about something that's going on in this country and about the spiritual ramifications of it. And that allowed me to go speak in places that I would never have, even if I was the starting tight end on the New Orleans Saints at that time.
When you were making that, like when you were coming out and saying that, did you? I mean, I don't think you thought you didn't do it for the tension. You did it because that's how you were feeling. But did you know the potential of like how much of an impact it could make, or did you really not know at the time?
I had no idea, Troy. Like I really, so we were sitting in we had gone to an event, a, a foundation event, and there were these people that we would see all the time in New Orleans that were homeless and stuff, and we had helped them out before. And for whatever reason, we were at the Target parking lot afterwards, and we had 4 kids at the time. No, we had 5 kids at the time. My wife had just had a baby. She had a lot of babies, 7 of them, but she just had number 5. And I'm sitting in there with the kids. She went into the Target to go get some things for these people because we were going to get them a hotel room and get them some stuff. And so I posted I sent it to a friend of mine, and they posted it on my Facebook, and then my phone died. And so my phone died. This is at night. My wife comes back in. We give the people the stuff that we have got for them. We go home, and it wasn't until like 11, something at night, and my wife goes, "Did you post something to Facebook? Because all my friends are sending me stuff." I said, "Yeah, I just wrote how I felt about what was happening in Ferguson, and the rest is history." So no, I had no idea, but I think it underscores where a lot of people are in our country because so often we hear the loudest voices on the left or the right or the progressives or the conservatives or the white or the black. We hear the loudest voices where there are a lot of people who are processing a lot of things in the middle that don't have the loud voices. And what I learned from that entire process was that a lot of people want to engage on some of these issues. They just don't know how, and they feel drowned out by the polar opposites.
I think my opinion is basically that, but even one step further is it's like you want to participate in it, but the people that are being so loud on either side, it's like yeah, I want to be involved in this, but the person that is talking like they're talking so crazy that I don't even want to be like I'm just gonna what I'll sit this one out. It's
Yeah.
like the social media has taken like all the town crazies and let them all talk to each other. And now it's like, whether you're Republican or Democrat or conservative or liberal, whatever, it's like your quote unquote side, which really that's the first problem, is no one should have a side, and every issue should be anyways. But in my opinion, it's like both sides have such crazy people that are talking so loud now and have their voices amplified by social media that it's like, if you agree or disagree, you don't even want to say anything because you know that you'll be subject to all the crazies coming after you about it.
Yeah, and you got to be willing to count the cost, because the other thing is, on certain issues, when you talk about something, it could cost something. It could cost you a job. It could cost you some friends. It could cost you your place at your church. It could cost you, whatever in your social club. Some of your kids' parents may look at you a little different because you said something that they don't necessarily agree with. And so we're always trying to decide what's worth our engagement, and that's a sad place to be. It's where we are, but I do think that there are ways to have those conversations, and sometimes it might not be on social media. Sometimes it might be face to face.
Yeah.
But I learned through that process that, man, and I also learned this. I also learned that, unfortunately, and Tim, the first thing that you said about when you asked me the question, it was about racism being a sin problem. And I also learned that sometimes people will take your words and use them as weapons against you, or use them as a shield for other things that you talk about. What I mean by that is, there were some people who took that and said, okay, it's all sin, then we just got to repent from it and ask God forgiveness, and we don't need to talk about it anymore. And the whole racism thing is a boogeyman. There's no such thing as institutional and structural racism, and that's not true. We have data to show that that's not true. On the other side, we have to be willing to say, man, there's a spiritual component to this as well. Let's address that, while we also talk about, man, education and poverty and those sorts of things that have historically impacted Black communities. So there's this, a lot of people, like you mentioned, Troy, a lot of people want to be in the either or camp. But there's a strong group of people who like really want to build solutions and do it from a faith platform, not one that is void of any talk of what Scripture says about these issues.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish there was a way to have the harder conversations and not be, I think, like what kind of what you said, and really it's way more for people like you two than me, but it's like everybody, I think anytime, like even when you said, just saying my dad asking about racism, I immediately, like my antennas went up. I'm like, whoa, oh, we got to be careful, because you can't even say, if you talk about racism, you say one thing wrong, you ask a question that you genuinely have, and that's it. Like it's not, I think cancel culture is mostly gone, but you don't really want to say something. Like you and I, we met each other for all of, an hour or whatever, but like I would never want to offend you with it, right? So like I wouldn't want to ask you something or say something, but I think the real way to make progress on issues like this, and there's plenty of others, and faith, and I think it's like we have to be open to having those conversations and not walk on eggshells and ask the questions that, like for me, like racism is such a weird thing for me because I grew up in such a bubble, you know? Like it doesn't, it's like what racism means to me. I know like the definition of the word, it's just like, it's more of just like a word to me, right? Like you have lived experiences and things like that. And I've seen it and I've experienced it and I've had friends and teammates. But racism, I don't know. I don't know if maybe I'm digging a hole, but it's like, we almost have to be more open with the things that we don't want to talk about, like politics, like religion, like racism, like those kind of things. It's like those are the things that we need to be talking about more. Like we need to have those awkward conversations.
I
I don't know
agree.
if that
I
makes
agree.
sense.
And I think also it's important, even when you think about, what is racism, we have to really be good at defining terms. Like, I'll use, definitions of racism like prejudice plus power. And so racism is not necessarily, I mean, when you mention racism, a lot of times our mind goes to individual acts of hate against somebody because of their race. Which race is a social construct. Anyway, there's no such thing. There's one race. But in our context, in America, we have what we call races. So that's a whole nother conversation. But we think about these individual acts, like I said something, somebody threw a rock at somebody, whatever it is. That's yeah. Those are things that happen sometimes for sure. We don't see them a lot, like you mentioned. But the bigger issue is what are the programs, policies that have been enacted over time that were race based that created inequities. For example, even when you go back to World War II and the GI Bill, when veterans who were white were able to gain certain benefits from the government to buy homes, to invest, those sorts of things, and they were denied to black veterans. How does that impact us sitting here right now in 2025? If my grandfather was a veteran, but he didn't get certain things that he should have, and your grandfather did get certain things, how does that impact where we sit right now? Now, that's not a personal thing. That's not a you did something to somebody else or I did something to somebody else. We can decouple that from the personal and just go to how is that race? Was that a racist? Yeah, it was. It impacted
Mhm.
people generations in certain ways. How do we talk about that? How do we address that? Should we address that? And I think that
Mhm.
that's the great thing. Well, I think that that's the important thing when we have these conversations is to take the personal out of it. Like, I'm not condemning you. You don't need to condemn me. Let's just look at our country and the history and the things that we can actually read about in books and say, how did this create the present that we have now? That's the conversation I think that we all benefit from. Everybody learns from those types of
Yeah.
conversations, and they don't have to be off-putting or or condemning to anybody.
This came up. I can't remember which episode it was, but it came up, and I said that I think racism is something too, specifically racism. It was like so bad, like whatever. Our grandparents' generation, I think it was like pretty bad. Maybe even like your guys' generation. In my experience, which is not the same as yours, obviously, but it seems like my generation and younger, it seems like it's like it's definitely not gone, but it seems like such a smaller problem than it used to be. Like even like the GI Bill or World War II and stuff like that. It's like I don't know anything that's there like right now today. That's just like blatantly wrong. I don't know, we've gotten that stuff out, and now it's a matter of almost like time, right? Because the reality is, if your grandfather served in World War II, mine didn't, but if both of our grandfathers served in World War II and one was able to get a house and one wasn't, there's no doubt that like the trajectory of the family line has been changed. But it's like when you get rid of those things that are just on their face wrong, what can you do other than time, right? And it's like I don't know. I think now, in my experience of like the things I've learned versus what I've seen and the people I've been around and stuff like that, it seems like it's certainly not gone, but way less of an issue now. Do you think that's true or no?
Uh, I wouldn't use the terms less of an issue. Um, I will say that as far as you know, de jure, segregation, what's on the books is gone in a lot of ways. But I also
Mhm.
think this, even going back to that example of, and there are others, but let's just use that one example. There was a point in time where nobody would say that that was wrong. And so
Mm.
I do think that time allows us to dig in and to inspect and to discover things that may not have had racial motivations on the surface, but then we discover that they did. If you were to interview people from when I was a kid in the 80s, they may say some of the same things. And then we look back at some of the sentencing that was happening
Sure.
from a racial standpoint, and we would say, oh, those it's crazy how, these how can this demographic be, convicted at a higher rate than others for the same crime?
Yeah.
So I think that there's always this discovery process. But I will say that, things have come a long way, and even in engagement and
Mm,
things you're talking about, like how you speak to people, things that you've seen, the communities that you live in. Like there's a lot that has changed, and we should be very, very, very proud of that. And it came because of a lot of advocacy by people in the church.
yeah.
By people of all ethnic backgrounds that were, fighting for this type of justice. Not just in the 60s, but I'm saying all the way up until today. My wife even is involved, and she leads a group at the school where they're having these types of conversations, and she's kind of created this kind of curriculum around the whole thing, which is totally a God thing because this is not something she wanted to be involved with. But there's instances like that probably wouldn't have happened, a decade ago.
When you just said that, it just reminded me. We had his name's Josh Dubin. He goes to like people who were wrongfully convicted or they were rightfully convicted, but they got way worse sentences because they got
Yeah,
whatever, if it's a racism thing or they had poor representation. It's like kind of like the Freedom Project. It's not that, but it's kind of like that. And we had on that episode, that's when I said I think it's not less, it's not, but it's like it's less frequent maybe is the right way to say it.
yeah.
But and he did not like my he
I'm
did not
sure
like,
it did. I'm sure it didn't because things morph. That things morph,
yeah,
and even if we say it's kind of like the foundation of a house, that has cracks in it and cracks in the wall, and it's like, me and you didn't build those cracks. I'm 45. You're younger than me. I'll be 45 next week. You're younger than me. We didn't put these cracks in the wall, but they keep on growing because the foundation, you know, was built on something that wasn't stable. And so we live in the house now, and so it's important that we look at the cracks and try to address the cracks as much as we can. We can't just deny that they're there.
yeah.
Um,
I think so. Yeah, I think so too. And we can move on, but it's like
yeah.
we have to address the cracks are there. We have to acknowledge first. You have to acknowledge them, right? You can't pretend that they don't exist. But then it's like and this is why I feel like it's generational too to me
And,
because I
and the
think
thing
like
and the
go
thing
ahead.
is and the thing is, two things can be true. Like
Yeah,
there can be a lot of cracks, and you also got to deal with your own house. Like everybody has agency. Everybody has
yeah,
a responsibility for themselves and for their family, right? And so, we make our own decisions for the most part. And so no matter what has happened or what's going to happen, you're still responsible. And this is what I love about scripture. It's like God continually he identifies systems and chastises leaders who promote systems of injustice, while at the same time holding individuals accountable for their actions. The two things can be true. And too often, going back to what we talked about the polar opposites, we're forced into a camp of, especially when it comes to racial injustice in America, white supremacy in America. We are forced into the, America is evil, and everything that's, degenerate in society that has a racial component is because of, racism in America. Or it doesn't matter what America has ever done. You're responsible for what you do. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, even if you don't have any boots, right? And so we're
mm,
forced into these two camps where that's not helpful for anybody. Number one, because it's not true, and number two, man, both of these things can be true.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
you,
it's like
you
back to the tribalism, right? It's like everything,
exactly, exactly.
everyone, they try to make everything into a team of
Mhm.
left versus right, red versus blue, up versus
It's,
down.
it's the cultural war, man.
Yeah.
I was actually going to ask about this. I'm going to give a little background if anyone missed it. So, you had that Facebook post that went viral after a grand jury in Ferguson, Missouri decided not to indict an officer after they shot Michael Brown. It reached tens of millions of people and showed the complexity of the issue. What did sharing that vulnerability cost you, and what did it give back to you? Also, has your opinion changed at all on the topic now that we're over a decade removed?
Wow, a decade removed. That's crazy. Um, what it cost me? I had more fears about what it would cost me than what I feel like it actually did. And I can remember when I hit send, gave the ghost to send it, after writing it in my notes app on my iPhone, I felt like it was something I had to say, um, because of everything that I was feeling. I mean, I remember we had played a Monday night football game, against the Baltimore Ravens, and we ended up. I think we lost that game, and I remember staying up all night long watching CNN, watching what was going on with the protests, those sorts of things, and I watched into the wee hours of the morning. So I knew that it was important to me and that I had to write something. But when I pushed send, I felt like I don't know how people are going to react. I don't know how my job is going to, how the Saints are going to deal with this. I don't know how my relatives are going to think about this. I don't know how my wife is going to think about this because I didn't run it past her before I sent it, which I probably should. Um, and so I had a lot of fear about that. But honestly, I can say most of the response was very positive. A lot of people said, "Man, that's what I wanted to say. I just didn't know how to say it." And it was a great encouragement to me for people to engage. I mean, I heard from people that, quite frankly, I didn't even know knew who I was, and probably didn't before that point. But it showed me just how tender the issue is, in this country, but also just how God can use a voice. Um, and no, as I look back, nothing really has changed about how I feel about it. When it comes to race, I have all those feelings when I see issues exactly like that, where an unarmed black man is killed by a police officer, primarily because of the history of policing in this country that is, recorded, how different neighborhoods are policed, all those sorts of things. There's a certain level of suspicion. But within that, the complexity of what I felt was that I can be angry about, the history in this country all the way up until today. I can also be introspective about what I would do in the situation if I was the officer or the young man. I can also be sympathetic toward both of their families. Somebody lost a loved one, another person, lost their job, maybe rightly so, maybe not. I can be fearful because look, I'm a black man. I'm 6'3", 240 something. I've got kids who are going to grow up to be looking like me, and I may deal with some of the same things I have. And I can also be hopeful because I've seen and I know what can happen in a country that continues to strive to rid itself of some of these things as we move forward. Like there's progress that has been made, and that's a hopeful thing. And also, I know as a believer, the power of the gospel, not just to deal with that specific situation, but sin manifests itself in a lot of different ways, whether it's our language, whether it's, you know, how we treat our spouse, whether it's if we're faithful to our spouse, how we treat our kids, our pride, our lust, our envy, our greed. All those sorts of things are still manifestations of sin. And yes, racism is a manifestation of sin. And so I can still be hopeful, and I still feel the same way about the saving, power and the transforming power of the gospel. I mean, that'll never change. So um, no, I don't feel like I lost. I mean, I lost a little bit. That there were some people who didn't agree, but the overarching experience was very positive from that, even though I was fearful going into it.
I have to ask about that Champ Bailey chase down play. It became a symbol of effort that was bigger than sports. What did that moment reveal to you about identity and finishing the play on the field and in life?
That play, I think, will live in infamy. You know what's funny about that, Tim? Like my kids a few years ago, my wife, one of them was being lazy about something, and so we were like, we're going to show them this play. So we showed it to them. They had no idea who it was. They also were like, why is it so fuzzy? Why is it so grainy? I can't even make this out. So we showed them that play, and then my wife was like, you know what that was? I'm like, no. I said, that's your father. That's how you need to be acting. Like, don't give up on things. Like, persevere, fight through stuff. So we used it in our house, and I've heard a lot of people say the same thing. Probably that play is really the thing most people want to talk to me about. And what's crazy is I wasn't trying to make a crazy play. I was mad because I hadn't gotten the ball that game, And I felt like I needed to do something. And when Tom threw the interception, I also didn't want to get in trouble on film the next day. And so I figured I would run. And then at some point around the 50-yard line, it turned into a race because Champ Bailey is one of those guys that, as a Georgia player, I revere greatly. And so it turned into like, let me see if I can catch him. But I think that it really was about what I learned really from being a child, not to give up. Going back to what my father taught me about sports and doing whatever you do for the Lord and giving 100% in everything that you do. That's what it was. I can remember playing at Georgia one time years before that, and we were playing against Clemson University, and the running back fumbled. Clemson picked the ball up. They ran it in for a touchdown. The next day, we watched the film, and none of us on offense chased him. And Coach Mark Rick had us run all practice the next day because we didn't chase the guy. Fast forward a few games later, we're playing in Tuscaloosa, and one of their players picked up a fumble or interception. We all chased him. And so I think that it was part of just the learning process of not doing it, understanding the importance of giving 100%, and then also just not wanting to let your teammates down. Um, that's why I did that. And unfortunately, back then, as you can remember, there were no pylon cameras, and so they got the call wrong. They got it wrong. It should have been our ball. They gave it back to the Broncos, unfortunately.
You've been called to speak on abortion, justice, and human dignity, topics that fracture people and relationships. How do you prepare your heart before stepping into those conversations?
Yeah, like Troy and I were saying, all the things that nobody wants to talk about, all the dangerous things. I'm like, God, why can't I just talk about leadership and family all the time? Things that people agree on. I want to pick justice, abortion, and race. Um, Preparing yourself for the conversation, I think, for me, it's really about being true to what I feel like God would have me say, and being rooted in what Scripture says about justice. To me, all those things are about justice. And John Perkins, the civil rights legend, in one of his books, he says that justice is really about basically restoring creation back to its original intent. And we see the original intent of creation, back in Eden in the garden, and we see how God, communed with Adam and Eve, and we see how before sin entered the world, how there was perfect relationship there between man and woman, between community, between man and creation, between man and God, and how sin ruined that. And so when I think about those issues of justice, I go into the conversation really about wanting to honor human dignity, number one, and number two, encourage people to restore right relationship. And so when it comes to, issues of life and preborn children, it's restoring relationship between the preborn child and their parents and their community, and giving that child an opportunity to live while not neglecting the needs of a mother who would say that, hey, I would love to parent, but because of my circumstances, I feel like abortion is the only tenable solution. So I go into the conversation not necessarily to condemn people who have had abortions or are considering abortions, but saying, okay, for those of us who want to support life, that's great. What are some things that would promote a woman making that choice and a man making that choice? When it comes to other issues of justice, I always try to go back and make sure I'm rooted in God's heart for justice. And whether that's in the book of Micah, Micah 6, whether it's in Amos, Psalms, where it talks about justice and righteousness being the foundation of God's throne, Isaiah, the book of James, like justice is all throughout scripture. And so I try to make sure I'm coming at it. Yes, there's policy involved in that. Yes, there's a philanthropy involved in a justice abortion conversation for sure. But it all comes from, as a believer, it comes from my, understanding of God's heart for protecting vulnerable people and for holding back the evil that makes or takes advantage of people and communities as we see throughout Scripture.
I think you said earlier, you hit the nail on the head. I think we have to start talking with ands, not ors. I think that's what I wrote down on my desk, like all this stuff, right? When you hear abortion, the only thing your brain goes to is the two extremes.
Yeah.
Like, oh, yeah, you're just using abortion as a way of birth control and you don't care about the baby, or oh, you think you're crazy if someone's rape or incest, they have to have the baby. And like the answer to all of these complex issues is somewhere in between. But yeah,
Yeah.
I would not want to be in your seat having to talk about these all the time.
I know, I know, but also I think like with the and conversation, it's not necessarily in between, but it's a better way. And so it's not a matter of like trying to, and I'm not saying you're saying this, but it's not a matter of trying to like compromise. Although in politics you have to do that. That's the nature of the beast. But from where I'm coming from and where we're coming from, it's what is a better way? It's not a compromise, just a better way. It's a more holistic way.
Yeah. Yeah, not splitting the difference between the
Yeah,
two camps,
exactly.
but
It's
yeah.
about holistic restoration. Like justice is about holistic restoration. And yes, do I think there should be laws that prohibit um, abortion? Yes, 100%. I believe life should be protected from womb to tomb, matter of fact, um, unequivocally. Do I also think that when you look at the women who get abortions and what they would say, I worked for an organization a while ago that did some research and they said 73% of abortion determined women say they would prefer to parent their child if their circumstances were different. And when you ask them about their circumstances, for many of them, relationship with dad is always, important. But there's also, employment. There's, food, for the kid. There's childcare. There are all these sorts of things that they say would help them make the decision to parent. And so the holistic approach is, yes, it's policy, but it's also addressing some of those things. And when you do that through policy, but you also do it through philanthropy, you do it through churches, you do all those sorts of things. But again, it's going to this more holistic approach as opposed to the ones that, get the most retweets on Twitter.
Yeah.
My journey with faith in Jesus has been quite the ride. I say that I used to be an undercover Christian and initially questioned God when I was diagnosed with ALS. Then I realized this is actually an opportunity from God to get my life back on the right track. You and your wife, Kirsten, have walked through seasons of growth, pressure, challenge, and joy. Where has your faith been most tested and most strengthened?
Whew, that's a heavy question. So we've moved around a lot in our career. Not as much as some people, but we've had several moves. Played on 4 different clubs, 2 of them twice. Each time we just moved across the country because I didn't want to be. We decided we'd never split up. Like I would never be in one place while they're there. Like we would just pack up the whole house, and we had the movers on speed dial, and they would just show up and and we would just do it right, whether it's for a year or whether it's for 3 years. That became progressively more difficult as more and more kids entered the mix. But we had a situation. We lived in Baltimore, Maryland, and we were there for 2 years. And in those 2 years while we were there, we had just had our 5th child, moved to Baltimore. Uh, I was going into year 11, right? No, I was going into year 14 at that point. And we get to Baltimore, don't know anybody, and we have 2 miscarriages within a year's time. Not only that, I tore my Achilles. I was out for a whole year, and we had a little baby that we were still taking care of. And I would say that time was probably the toughest from not a faith doubting standpoint, but it was toughest from a Lord, we thought we heard you. Why is this happening standpoint? Because we had 5 kids, and then I was like, I'm good with 5, And then we waited, and then Kirsten felt like, no, we need a number 6. And then I finally came around. I felt like the Lord was saying, yes, let's go for number 6. We were on one accord and never had dealt with miscarriage before, and then ended up having one. And then that was really tough because as people, we don't deal with miscarriage very well, especially as a church. We don't deal with it very well. We don't quite know what to say. It can be a very lonely time for the 30% of men and women who deal with it. And then it happened again. And we're like, Lord, I thought we were on the same page. We're having this loss, and we don't really even have anybody here in Baltimore that we know because we're still fairly new. Um, so that was probably one of the toughest times, just being there those 2 years. And then I tear my Achilles, which how injuries are. And, not that God is, you know, not shining on you when you're hurt. That's not true at all. But it's just the culmination of a bunch of different things that made it very difficult. But what happened in those 2 years, which is very redeeming, is that we hosted the Ravens Bible study, team Bible study, couples Bible study at our house. Now, I never wanted to do that. I'm an introvert, and I'm like, I don't want all these people at my house, whatever. So I tear my Achilles, and then I'm like, well, I'm going to be out for the year. Maybe we should host the couples Bible study, which my wife had already wanted to do. And so we end up doing that. I'm on my scooter because I can't walk because I have Achilles. We're going through miscarriages. And then we have, about 7 or 8 couples from the team that came to our house while I wasn't playing for the couples Bible study. And now, 10 years later, almost, looking back at what some of those couples have done and the influence that they've had from a time when we were really, really low. But God used it and used that house to do that. Now, in retrospect, we look back and say, wow, God used that time in a time where it was really, really hard for us as a couple.
Before we close, brag about your family for a minute. Tell us something about your wife and 7 kids that makes you smile, and one thing you hope they will remember about their dad long after the cleats, the books, and the broadcasts are gone.
My wife, so we met at University of Georgia. I saw her I transferred from Duke University. And after training camp, all the students come to school. There's like a block party at the student center, and I saw her for the first time. And I knew she was going to be my wife. I don't know why, I just knew. And so I didn't talk to her at all, though. I didn't talk to her until several months later in Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And we actually met because she was a softball player. She walked on the softball team for 2 years. So we met there. We got married after my rookie year, as I mentioned before. And my wife is the most caring, like discerning and welcoming person that you probably will ever meet. Like I joke, but strangers will go up to her, and within about 5 minutes, they're telling her like their life story and asking her to help. Like it's the weirdest thing ever. Like she exudes peace and you know gratitude and the Holy Spirit. Like she exudes those things, and people. I mean, what she's doing now, she actually has been trained to kind of guide people through this 2-day process where she takes you through all the turning points in your life, and you kind of emerge from this process with a calling, a purpose statement, just understanding more about yourself. So that's where she is now. But she makes me better. Like she challenges me in a lot of ways. Watching her, she challenges me to love, more tenderly. She challenges me, to engage with people. She challenges me as a believer. She's my best friend. Honestly, she's my best friend. What do I want my kids to know and remember about me? Well, I want them to remember that I love their mom and that I treated their mom with respect, that I served her, and that they saw us fight, but that they saw us make up. Because we do have our disagreements, but we also want to make it a point for them to know that mommy and daddy have these things and they're not perfect with each other all the time, but that they made up. And I want my kids to know that that I love them outside of anything that they could do. Like as an athlete, we know so much about being honored and loved because of our performance. Like our entire life as an athlete is, did you do good or did you do poorly? Like, did you make the block or did you not? Did you catch the pass or did you not? Like, it's all a transactional performance based metric on your value. And one thing that I preach to the kids all the time, and I want them to get from me, even when I'm excited when they perform well, because I want to be excited when they perform. I want to encourage them towards excellence. Like I want them to be good at things. I want to challenge them and stretch them. But I want them to know that the essence of who they are is loved tremendously by their dad. I'm proud of them. But even more important than that, I want them to know how their Heavenly Father thinks about them because it is so much more important and so much better than anything Daddy can lavish upon them. I want them to know that, their dad, try to lead this house and care for his house as great as he could in the way God would design for him to do so.
Now on to our final word segment where we ask our guests a few rapid fire questions. What was the happiest moment in your life?
Probably when I had my first child.
What is the biggest adversity you've faced?
My perfectionism.
What are you most excited about?
Seeing what God does with all these kids, all 7 of them. It's going to be epic.
What advice would you give your high school self?
It's okay to fail.
Do you have any book recommendations for us or for the listeners?
I'm reading right now a guy y'all maybe should interview. It's called Don't Let Nobody Turn You Around by my friend Justin Giboney. That's a good one. The other book recommendation is this one. If you don't read that, then the other ones don't matter. And if you're a dad, I've got a book called The New Dad's Playbook that I wrote for new dads. And my wife has a book called Sis, Take a Breath. If you're a woman looking for purpose and rest in a crazy world.
The name of our podcast is Nothing Left Unsaid. Do you have anything you want to say?
I'll say this. I wasn't quite sure what this podcast was going to be like, but because I don't listen to a whole lot of podcasts, to be honest with you. But I'll say this: the relationship between you and your father is inspiring, and I only see a small snippet of it. And I think that one of the most important things in our culture is manhood and fatherhood. So many of our social ills have a father component. And this is not to say that your relationship with your dad is perfect. I know it's not. Neither is mine. But when I see 2 generations of men who are fathers, husbands, and are trying to pass that on to their kids, it makes me smile. And so I just want to tell you that I was encouraged today by seeing y'all's interaction and by understanding a bit of what you all do together. But also, I think it's a testament and an admonition for all of us as fathers in times when we feel inadequate, times when we have fear, times when we feel like our voice doesn't matter, times when we want to draw back and be silent and be passive. That not only do our families need us and our spouses and our kids, but in general, society needs strong male leadership and needs men to be all that we're called to be. So thank you all for that example.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's funny when you were talking about like with your dad, it hit home with me. It's like I know exactly what you mean. He's like your hero, but you feel like you can never live up to it, but you also are friends. It's like, yeah, it's a whole thing. Benjamin, before we let you go, the last question I ask everybody, and we've met some really awesome people through this, is you kind of got to know us a little bit. Hopefully we talk again, but who are a couple people that you think, personally, do you think we should try to have on the podcast in the future?
I think, you guys do a whole bunch of different types of people. As far as athletes go, Justin Forsett is a great guy. Matt Forte, good friends. Drew, obviously. I think a really cool person, I just interviewed him for my podcast, Dr. Cornell West. Just, you could go really deep with him in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
An incredible person. Um, yeah.
Those are all awesome. And I'm going to make a recommendation. I've never done this before. Back your way. I don't know. You guys might have even played together, but Latavius Murray, him and I played together at UCF, and he was on the Ravens. He might have been there when you were there, and he was on the Saints. I don't know
Yeah.
if you guys would cross paths, but he's
We
big with
crossed,
like yeah.
yeah, we crossed paths at PAO, at Pro Athletes Outreach, probably a year ago. That's the first time I met him.
That's what made me think when you were saying that, because we had him on really early on in the podcast, and he was talking about doing all that kind of stuff too. And
Yeah.
when you were saying that, I'm like, oh, I got to connect these guys. But he would be great for your podcast, but a great guy too, just for what you're doing, young family, former
Yeah.
player, all that
I
stuff.
never met him. And then at the conference, I met him and we connected there.
Yeah, you guys have a lot of similar, very different people, but a lot of similar values, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool, man. I appreciate you guys.
Benjamin, I just wanted to say thank you for the way you played the game, for the way you love your family, and for the strength and gentleness you bring into conversations our country desperately needs. You've reminded us today that leadership begins at home, that faith holds when fame fades, and that justice is something lived out, not argued about. Thank you for joining us today, and may God bless you and your family.
Thank you so much, Tim. I appreciate your voice and I appreciate this platform and the way you've allowed God to use you in this mighty way during this season of your life. So it was a joy to join you guys.
Yeah, thanks so much.